And we're back once again on the Shad Olson Show, the SOS Radio Network, and we're live and in studio with Dr. Alan Keyes. He is a former economic ambassador to the United Nations, appointed by the man that we've heard from already in this program via soundbite, as we do so frequently here, revisiting some of those loquacious quotes from Ronald Wilson Reagan, the man known as the great communicator and who was so adept at touching the heartstrings and strumming that inherent deoxyribonucleic acid inside the heart of every American patriot that we know resonates whenever we hear those constitutional principles elocuted and articulated with force and with passion. And I believe the man who's in studio right now has the ability to do that that very thing. Dr. Keyes, we've had the privilege here in Rapid City to have the treat of your oratory skill and your breadth of historical knowledge and perspective on the greatness of this nation, and to hear the things that you've had to say this entire weekend. It's scarcely possible to even encapsulate that in the time that we have here today, but we're so happy to have you in studio and to be able to talk about these things. Thank you for being here.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I've been very impressed, in fact. I mean, I've been to South Dakota on occasions in the past, very often focused as I am now on the issue of life, and I think that the reason that there is such a heart and spirit for that amongst people here has to do with the appreciation people have of the connection between the profound issue of unalienable right that is involved in the issue of life and the fact that that sense that there is right and wrong determined by God that constrain what government should be, that constrain its use and abuse of power, and that give to individuals the prerogative to meet their responsibility to God according to their own proper and conscientious judgment. That sense is strong in people in the state of South Dakota, and I think that makes the assault on the innocent life of the children in the womb even more offensive. There's a connection, I think, between the deep appreciation of the moral premises of our constitutional way of life and an appreciation of the fact that this is not just an assault on the individual lives of children in the womb. It is in fact an assault on the moral and spiritual life of the country itself. That
very fabric that we enjoy and the things that are made possible by the foundings of our country are created on a framework which acknowledges that the human individual is a divine creation of God.
Well,
Isn't that true? And if you're
critical.
A divine creation, your government can't push you
right.
can't push you around the way they can if you're nothing more than a decimal on a spreadsheet somewhere.
And what is happening is something that I saw the manifestation of it first in a broad way when I was working with the Reagan administration against these forces at the United Nations.
Yes.
That were seeking to impose the socialist communist view of, quote, rights. And what they tried to do in the Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States and the children's rights efforts they made and all that was to redefine the word right so that it was a grant of government. Government decided what rights you have. And on that basis, of course, if a government can decide what rights you have, the government can decide you have no rights.
The government giveth and the government taketh
Amen.
away.
And so the fundamental premise of limited government is that government's use of power and the justice of its use of power must be seen in the context of the fact that God works directly with individuals, shaping each individual in their human nature so that they are in possession of certain inclinations to respond to the obligations that God has laid upon our conscience. A right is, in fact, a statement of right action, which you then carry out in fact. And you can claim, no, you don't have the right to interfere with me as I seek to raise decent children, as I seek to make sure my family is taken care of, as I seek to build a decent place where I will be able to raise crops or do a business that will help to keep the wherewithal of my family going and make a contribution to my community. Individual rights, the right to preserve your life, parental rights, all of these things are a reflection of the obligations we have to God, the inclination to observe them built into our nature by God. That's why they're natural rights.
That's right.
It's a natural sense of right. And when we are acting on it, the government can help us out. It can be our instrument in a compatible way, but it cannot violate, interfere, or usurp our own judgment as we move forward. That's what liberty is all about. And that's the bedrock foundation of this country. We now have, sadly, Shad, an elite that I think has abandoned that. And they are wholesale giving in to a godless understanding that essentially seeks to substitute history and God, history and government for God when it comes to defining justice. And at the end of the day, that means justice will have any definition the powerful give to it. And if you happen to be the one controlling the money, the power, the perquisites, then you'll stomp on whoever gets in your way. America was founded to replace that kind of government, which had characterized humanity for thousands of years, and to replace it with a form of government that was going to show respect for the individual rights of all people insofar as they shared the common title to humanity. And I think that's one of the things that helped to give this country such an allure and appeal to people around the world. Because in countries that basically looked at folks, as I said earlier today, and said, you are what you're going to be, and your children are what you are, and you can't do anything about it. We instead said, you shall be what God intended you to be, and no government or power has the right to stand in your way as you pursue, in accordance with God's will and responsibility, the talents that he has given you. That was, I think, the moral allure of America. It went beyond money. It went beyond the opportunity for this or that kind of power. It had to do with the opportunity for a sort of dignity that people did not know in other countries but knew here.
That we would have the ability as people who come to the United States have the right to pursue whatever their version of the American dream is, and ostensibly through their own application of time, talent, and ambition, become and rise to whatever level they are able based on those abilities and taking advantage of the opportunities that they're given and the talents endowed by God.
And the interesting thing is, of course, and some people want to turn away from this and act like it's not so, but as people come, they are also called to accept the understanding of justice that makes that possible. In other words, as we lay claim to the opportunities that rights give rise to and that the respect for rights gives rise to, we are also then relying on the basic premise of authority, which was articulated when the country was founded, which has to do with the fact that these rights are not the gift of government or human beings, but the gift of God, and therefore must be respected, not because I am black and you are white, or I am English, or I am Italian, or I am Indian, or I am this, or I am that, or because I was born with this in my mouth, or that other thing is my opportunity. No, they must be respected because of the transcendent will of God.
That's
and
right.
So what we expect to be respected in us, we must respect in others. It was that sense of a commitment to a mutually adhered to understanding of justice that would be seen as what united us, that we couldn't just go out and pursue our own good without any regard for the rights of others, but instead had to have regard for what was right, because what was right established the claim to right of us and all the others. And I think that that has been one of the keys to forging a common identity amongst all the people who come from different parts of the world. It's not as if we simply remain what we were, whatever that might have been. We become something different. And in becoming something different, we fulfill an idea of humanity that did not, I think, exist in the existential sense, in the sense of really being there in the world, until America began this effort to forge it.
Which is where the inherent attraction came from in the beginning. Would you agree with the fact that what we're seeing now in terms of the way government is insisting on dictating the relationship between the state and the individual in the United States currently is we're entering what I believe is the end game and the culmination of the intrinsic and inherent philosophical argument of the age, which is, am I just a blob of protoplasm? Am I a bag of flesh that can do anything that I want with impunity and with no consequence except that which the state would put down on me? Because there is no God. We have Charles Darwin and Herbert Spencer who came along and freed us from this idea of an almighty God and said, you're nothing more than a product of evolution. And since you're an animal, we can treat you as an animal. And government has the ability to reduce that relationship down in ways that allow them to do anything that they want to us with compunction and impunity.
I think that what's interesting about what has happened over the course of really the 20th century, basically late 19th, early 20th century, throughout all the years of human history, pretty much in different parts of the world, there had been an understanding of power that favored the elites. Yes. It was called aristocracy, oligarchy, monarchy based on aristocracy, whatever you like, but it favored the elites.
Yes.
It favored the exceptional few who could, with their talents, abilities, this, that, or the other thing, gain positions of prominence and power. Okay. Now, they didn't mind at all when the idea of the divinities and the gods or God was used to support their claim to power.
No, it was
as
usually
divine right of kings.
It was usually a
and so
sanction
and
and
so
endorsement
yes.
that they added to their resume.
That's right.
Thanks to the church.
And God, made me of noble birth, and God gave me the victory in the battle, and therefore by right of birth, by right of conquest, by right of superior this and that, I rule over you, and you must do as you're told. Well, then along comes the era in the 1700s when America was founded, when there was articulated and eventually put into practice by our founders the notion that, oh, by the way, God does not stand on the side of the few. God actually, when you look at the whole of humanity, looks at each and every human being as equal, and as Jefferson said, no one is born with a saddle on their back, and no one else is born booted and spurred to ride them. I always thought that was beautiful.
It's a beautiful quote.
We are human beings with God's intention in us as individuals. Well, is it a coincidence, do you think, Shad, that after this discovery of the kind of godly basis of the claim of the people to govern themselves and the establishment on a constitutional basis of what had been said throughout all those thousands of years of human history to be impossible, we in fact saw the establishment of a stable regime of self-government by the people, spread over a whole continent, and ended up building a nation that became the greatest nation ever to have existed on earth, right? Until that time. Now, that would seem to vindicate the idea that if you respect God's intention for each and every individual in terms of that right, and you call on them to respect their responsibility to God as they use those rights, you get a pretty good result. And we did. But I also think we shouldn't be surprised to know that the elites who kind of were booted from exclusive power by the success of our way of life, they're not particularly happy. And our founders predicted, by the way, Hamilton gave a long speech at the convention, others second the motion. He talked about the princes, that's what he called the elites.
Yes.
And said that there would always be ambition that sought to overturn the right of the people to govern themselves and to restore and reestablish a system of elite oppression. And they wanted to frame a constitution that would keep the people from oppressing the few so that their talents could be harnessed to the good of the society, but would also keep the few from oppressing the people. And that balance, which we see in the various mechanisms for checking the power of government, for making sure that it could not be consolidated and abused against minorities, whether they were wealthy or poor, or against the majority by minorities who were claiming status on the basis of their power or wealth. This was actually the kind of thing they wanted to see, so that you'd get a decent regime in which the government's power was limited and moderated by the need to respect justice for everyone, whether you were many, few, rich, poor. That was the result. And I think, of course, it's turbulent. It requires effort. It's not something where you just flick a switch and lay back and it happens. No, it required tremendous effort and development and education and change. But it was successfully built up and sustained, and I think became the basis for a very successful result.
Absolutely.
We are now in an era.
We need to hold that thought. We need to take a break. That's precisely what Dr. Keyes has laid out, is precisely why when we look at this current permutation, this current administration inside the United States, there is such a disconnect and disaffection that's happening on the part of the common people across the country as we look at a government which now seeks to install itself over our head, not simply as master versus slave, but as God, our essential and existential God in our universe. Are we going to live with that? Are we going to put up with it? Or is there some way maybe to escape this two-party hell that we've been relegated to and find some way of electing people who care about the Constitution and regard their public service as exactly that, service to the people in a government of, for, and by the people? Back to close things out with Dr. Keys. Is there a way out of the two-party system? We'll hear if he has an idea. Shad Olson Show, the SOS Radio Network.